15.
Thank you, Wendy Cope. What an honour. I should just say that it wasn't actually a word that we had to refer up, it was a space. And it's very revealing that Wendy, as a poet, doesn't necessarily distinguish between them in memory. Because Andrew Motion was handing over the gilded, which is butt of sack, and we asked her, that we thought maybe she might be the next poet laureate. So I said, Wendy, what do you reckon? Do you have any comment on the race, as it were? And she thought for a second, and I don't think her husband did write this one. Oh, he did? Okay, so that I won't say anything. I will be brief, I will be blunt. The poet laureate should have a... And you can see Radio 3 wanted to broadcast it, but they need to go through the hoops. Compared to that sort of hoop, the adventure that this book and this talk is based on was about as difficult and dangerous as checking into a Premier Inn. I wish I could present myself as the ancient mariner, but it's clearly not true. I emailed head of public relations and said, may I go shipping with you? And they have 18% of world container trade. And they put out as much CO2 as Denmark. And in fact, they appear in another Wendy Cope poem, their Maersk, the White Star. And they said, sure, we're a $10 billion company. We're not even going to ask to read your manuscript. We'll leave the lawyers out of it, which is wonderful. And so I went to sea, and I've always wanted to do it. In fact, this is reminiscent of standing on stage in Llangattock Primary School in about 1984, feeling exactly as I do now, actually, and saying, I must go down to the sea again, to the lonely sea in the sky, which was better than being Herod, which was my other perennial role in Welsh primary school because of my haircut and accent and presumed class. All this stuff sort of falls away, rather, when you take ship. I'm going to do 15 minutes. So the first section of this is about the ships themselves. And I wonder, ladies and gentlemen, if you're feeling brave, ladies and gentlemen, put up your hands if you name your car or have ever named a car. Right, thank you very much, thank you. I came here in a white Beamer belonging to my friend, and I said, what's it called? And she said, Kelly. The Gerd Maersk is a sentient structure. It was Chateaubriand describing the sailing ship. Oh my God. Chateaubriand describing the sailing ship as our most beautiful technology, really. And now what they are is they're our biggest man-made objects. And they are sum totals of their capacities, their histories, their stories. And obviously they're all she to the men who operate them, and they are mostly men. It's a good career, a deck officer for a woman, and you get very good ones out there, but I only met one, and my captain had never sailed with one. Basically, the world works on racial, kind of feudal pyramids. So these ships, down in the bottom where no one can see anything, in the engine rooms and in the cabins which have no light because of the containers, are Filipinos, at least on my ships, and also Indians and Chinese. Not Indians, Indonesians and Chinese. And you go up a little bit and you'll get to the Indian deck officers. So it's sort of brown men, white Eastern European men, and then at the top, white European, Western European, Danes or Dutch, in this case, officers. And it wouldn't be such a terrible thing. I mean, different nations have different specialities, and the Filipino specializes in seafaring because it produces these wonderfully optimistic, tough, funny, kind, sensitive men who put their lives on hold, really, until their retirement age, for the sake of their communities. Except that you can have a Filipino and an Indian engineering officer doing the same job back to back. And when they're on duty, they don't really sleep because they have a squawk box, so they listen with one ear all the time. And it goes on for, you start 9-month contract, and then you want an extension to 13 months. And in that time, you'll get off the ship a couple of times, maybe for a few hours in Hong Kong if you're lucky. If it's more than that, if it's a day in Los Angeles when they're unloading the whole thing, it's a big deal, And it wouldn't be so bad, except that Filipinos and Indians are paid different rates of pay and white people are paid more. It used to work that way in South Africa during apartheid, and the argument then was there's $1 spent in a township would go a lot further than a dollar spent in downtown Johannesburg. But of course, the world abominated that then, and we should reject it now. The only problem is that on the day that Lehman's went bust, every ship in the Maersk fleet, and in fact most of them worldwide, throttled back from 23 knots, which gets the job done, in a couple of months, to 17 knots. World trade quite literally slowed down. And if they were to stop, if you ever looked up the UK strategic oil reserve, it's fascinating. It's typically British fudge. Because we were a net exporter of oil, we didn't have to have one. But now we're an importer and we've sort of overlooked the necessity. Obviously we haven't. We don't publish the figures and I don't think we're in compliance. The point is everything depends on these things which go on out of sight of land. And you can see this is a horrible old battler built by the Dutch, designed for the South Pacific trade, freezing, permanent audio effects of a hurricane, if we're talking about sentient structures, impregnated with chemical, fish. The only time my crewmen had ever seen inside the containers that they do actually risk their lives for was a blizzard ripped the top off this one. It's a seed drill going from Germany to Canada. And what's going on out of our sight and mind borders on Kurt Vonnegutian insanity. My sort of shipmate next door in the next Premier Inn cabin risked his life every 4 hours to climb up a ladder in a gale and things going 20 degrees, 20 degrees, 20 degrees, and he's checking the reefers, which are refrigerated containers, to make sure the milk that had been loaded originally in Argentina, taken to Antwerp, where I joined the ship, and was now recrossing the North Atlantic to Montreal, was still cold. It sounds absurd, but the point is, the people are dying and the planet is being spent up on the little plastic covers that some companies wrap tea bags in. And it's up to you, ladies and gentlemen. You are, I can see, a ferociously influential audience. Capitalism clearly suits you, and I know you're doing the right thing by it to the extent that you're able. Of course you are. But it's still dangerous, mad, and I think bad. And the sea has had a very good year this year. Not because of my book, unfortunately, nor yet my beard, which I got rid of in your honour at my mother's insistence. It was, for one weekend, this beard was famous. It was on Radio 4 and Radio Wales. The sea has had a good year because it's come ashore, and it's going to keep coming ashore. And you English are going to need canoes or friends in Wales. This is the North Atlantic, the loneliest place I've ever been. So half of the book, and the best bits in it actually, are other people's writing about the places we travelled over, because they say the sea has no memory. Well, of course, the sea is all memory, and you can feel it. And there were nights, especially on that one, where you're sort of flying blind into Atlantic storms, and the chart said things like, do not use for navigation, inaccurate. And you were like, oh, well, there we go again, never mind. And I said, how's the bow? And they were like, well, she was designed for South Pacific, but we have reinforced it because on the first trip it moved back 3 meters. I was like, really? That's an awfully long way. And when we got to Montreal, I asked the guy, is this a good ship? He's like, yeah, this is a fine ship, this is okay. And I said, because he's a ship inspector paid for by the shipping company. So, he said, there's no conflict of interest there. But I said, do you ever stop them sailing? And he says, oh, yeah, there are certain things. I was like, what? He said, well, crack in the main deck. And I said, does that happen a lot? He said, on Chinese ships, you'd be surprised. Apparently, I said, what's wrong with the Chinese ships? He said, they have the worst steel, the worst construction, the least safety, and the worst operating procedures, and the worst maintenance. So if I have a message for the people of China, which I was asked for the other day actually by a Chinese newspaper, I said, you invented great shipping when they discovered what became Portuguese West Africa, East Africa, sorry. That's the sailor in me. I don't worry about which way it is, whether we're up or down. One of my Dutch friends said, when you are standing up, you are working. When you are lying down, you are sleeping. And when you are doing both, it's bad weather, And there was a lot of bad weather. All they ask for really is quiet seas, because if they sign the contract, they know what they're up for. Most of them don't have internet, so you can imagine, being a young father, leaving it all for 9 months, and your ability to do anything about what's going on at home is tremendously limited. And you end up in these astonishingly alien, and to me, beautiful environments. And the last 5 minutes of this talk are going to be about the sea itself, which is what I went to find out about, really. And as you will know who've read Conrad and Melville, the sea is the most fabulous teacher, stage, and what would be the right word? Analyst, I suppose, horribly, since we're in Notting Hill. As Conrad and Melville use it, the sea reveals character quicker than anywhere except a battlefield. And the lovely thing about the sea is it just goes on and on and on. And your relationship with time becomes very strange with the sea. For example, we went across the Pacific on my first ship, so it's 2 weeks. And at one point, you're 1,000 miles from land in every direction. Sorry, a week from land. Oh, there he is. There we are. That's Joel. And he didn't die. And he nearly did, actually, because the wind caught the hatch cover. And there was a moment where I'm thinking, Christ. But no, he came back alive, and it was lobsters from Halifax that were being taken. They would eventually go to France. And if anyone can explain to me why we were taking milk from Argentina via Antwerp to Canada, they don't have cows in Canada. And why is it that we send BMW 3 Series, to Japan, and they send us Lexus? I suppose posting each other badges would be out of the question. The beauty and miracle of the sea, Conrad sums up where he says, the peace of God begins anywhere 1,000 miles from the nearest land. And that is true. And the Pacific, I was like the anti-Jonah, When somebody joins a ship, they look for someone serious. They look you up and down very quickly. And you can't really fake them. My sea captains really were proper sea dogs. Maersk don't make captains much below the age of 50, because you have to know what you're doing, what you're looking for, what's going to happen. And the captain dealt in absolutes. These are the things that will happen, and everything else is not going to happen. At sea, the least predictable environment in the world. And he was very, very good at it, clearly, and he loved it. A lot of the fun has gone out of the life since they took away the alcohol, the money, the time, and knowledge of what you were carrying, because now it's all just containers and lists of poisonous chemicals. And so you don't sail with a crew so much with a disparate sort of collection of different nations, and you're only brought together as a crew if something goes wrong, like a fire, and you will have to deal with it, and on lifeboat drills, which were hilarious. Anyway, as the anti-Jonah, I crossed the Pacific Ocean, and we had 2 Tuesdays, of course, back to back, and we ate pancakes for some reason. We kept eating pancakes. I said, why are we eating pancakes? Time jump today. And we would jump 3 hours, and by the end of it, it was astonishing coming across, because the first thing I saw of America was a tiny, hardened line on the horizon after 2 weeks. And in Chinese, it's Gumshan, it was Gold Mountain, because of the gold rush, but also this idea of a fabled place. And we don't know when they discovered it, when that crossing was first done. There have been some outrageous claims made. For example, we're talking about the Chinese fleet. The future of shipping, hopefully, is big vessels with bigger, rigid sails that sail downwind and use their engines when they can't do that, which would be a straight return to the great days of Chinese exploration. And I suppose the things I want to tell you about the sea are that you hear a lot about its pollution and the rapine and the terrible savagery with which we treat it. And all that is undoubtedly true. But it is, the captain said, when we were in the lift, we arrived on the other side of the Pacific Ocean at 2:30 exactly on the 16th of October, after 2 months, typhoon, multiple engine failures, fires, alarms, dodgy pilots. He did it. And he said, look, Claire, you see the log? It said 2:30:00. I thought, well done. 115,000-ton ship, all ghosts and trainers made in Vietnam. All sailors have a sense, if not of sentimentality, then at least romanticism, I think. Certainly the deck officers do, if you sign up for staring out of the window. But the thing I wanted to tell you about the sea is that the captain said, as we stood in the lift, he said, when you get home, they will ask you what it was like. And you will tell them, and they won't really hear you. They will imagine sunsets and sunrises. And no one understands, even when you tell them, how vast the oceans are. And I think that's a great comfort. Thanks very much indeed.